Greetings, Love Posse. Thank you for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing to our channel. Today's message: why has African consciousness been excluded from spiritual consciousness conversations? So, how did this begin for me? A friend of mine sent me an email. A dear, dear friend of mine. We've been on this path, spiritual path together. Goddess Cat, I love you. She sent me an email and said, Goddess, you have to watch this video. She attends Naropa and she's studying transpersonal psychology. I have a master's degree in transpersonal psychology. So I watched the video, and in the video, Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum, author of a number of books, clinical psychologist. He also was the winner of the Abraham H. Maslow Award, awarded to him by the American Psychological Association, was being interviewed. One of the books that he wrote that I'm waiting to receive, eagerly waiting to receive and read, is Our African Consciousness: The Black Origins of Mysticism and Psychology. So in this interview, he discusses and shares that all humanity's spiritual and collective consciousness originated in Africa. Now, I wasn't shocked by this, but I was stunned because this was the first time I had heard of African consciousness spoken in this context. It wasn't studied or taught in my graduate program. And my friend is sharing this with me, and she was just so excited. We've had a number of conversations about this, and we were wondering, why hasn't this been a part of the spiritual and consciousness conversation in New Age spirituality? In these academic disciplines of spirituality, transpersonal psychology, and consciousness studies. And we just got off on questions. You know, I was amazed that her instructor at Naropa was teaching this information in his transpersonal psychology class. I was fascinated and interested because it takes a lot of courage to teach this kind of information in a well-known university in transpersonal psychology, where most of the study is European psychology and consciousness, and it's been westernized. Spirituality and consciousness studies has been westernized. Most of it doesn't even give credit to indigenous peoples and African spiritual consciousness sources. So, Love Posse. So, Love Posse, the question I'm posing to you is, why has African consciousness been excluded from the spiritual consciousness conversation? You've taken those workshops, gone to retreats. I have. Online workshops, in-person workshops. Have you ever heard anyone in the New Age community mention African consciousness? If you've gone to CIIS or Naropa or Saybrook or JFK University, which has been closed, or Sophia, have you heard or learned anything about African consciousness in your transpersonal psychology or consciousness studies or spiritual psychology programs? And if you haven't, why not? Spirituality and consciousness studies are supposed to be expansive, the study, field, discipline, science of expansiveness, the transformative process, whole personness. But how can these programs, these studies be expansive if they're excluding African consciousness? Scientists are certain that human life, humanity, originated in Africa. Therefore, Africans had some consciousness, spiritual practices. And this can be verified, which it has, by anthropologists, archaeologists, historians. So why do we not know more about African consciousness when, as Dr. Bynum expresses, all of humanity has an African conscious template blueprint that we operate from, whether we're conscious or unconscious of it. It's there. Human life began in Africa. Africans studied psychology, philosophy, spirituality, consciousness. Osiris worked with what we call Kundalini energy. Kundalini is just another name for it, but it was called something else in Africa. It predates Kundalini energy. So why don't we know more about this? That's the question that I'm asking all of you. And if you're feeling resistance to this conversation, ask yourself why. It's because of my dear friend. I realized, oh my goodness, Tyffany, your understanding and knowledge of consciousness is more limited than you thought, because this is a huge piece. African consciousness is a huge piece that I wasn't aware of consciously, that I haven't been taught. Maybe you haven't been taught. And I realize that New Age community, that these academic programs are maybe not aware of their own shadows. They're not aware that they are limited and not expansive, not as expansive as they think. That maybe they're not teaching expansiveness, that they're teaching a concentrated, structured, Europeanized, westernized form of consciousness studies, transpersonal psychology, spiritual psychology. Those are the questions that came up for me and for my friend, my goddess Kat. And I'm grateful for her and her interest in this subject. I'm grateful for her for having the courage to sharing this with me and being open. And I'm asking you to have the courage and the openness and the desire to learn more than what you know, what you've been told. We're only being given pieces and pieces of what people think, other people think is important for us to know, because maybe they're not dealing with their own shadows and resistance. Maybe they don't have the eyes to see that they are working within limitations, their own limitations, the limitations of their programs. Dr. Bynum discusses that even Jung and Freud was aware of African consciousness and acknowledged to some extent, even with some resistance, they still acknowledged to some extent African consciousness. I've studied Jung and Freud in my program in psychology, initially in undergrad, and in my transpersonal psychology program. And there was no mention of this. So we have to research and study outside of what we are being taught, what we're getting from New Age spirituality. If you are true to this path, if you are committed and devoted and serious about spirituality and consciousness and knowing more than your truth, more than the truths of other people who are teaching these disciplines, you're going to have to take it upon yourself to learn, to study, to seek out this information. There's no blame here. I'm just pointing out, I'm raising questions. I am grateful for what I know. I am grateful for what I've learned. I'm a person of curiosity. Learning is my passion, so I always want to know more. I'm always going to ask the questions. I'm asking you, are you open? Are you committed enough to your spiritual path, to knowing more than your truth, to go down this road, to ask questions about African consciousness, to study about African consciousness, to be able to do the inner work if you're feeling some resistance to what I'm saying, because isn't spirituality and consciousness and New Age supposed to be about being open, being aware, being expansive, learning and growing and developing psychologically? And if it is, then why hasn't African consciousness been included? Why has it been excluded from the spiritual consciousness conversation? And what can we do about it? We can include this in these programs. If you're watching and you attend any university that offers spiritual psychology, transpersonal psychology, consciousness studies, share this with your chairs and instructors. Ask them if it's not included. How can we include this? Why are we not being taught this? Why isn't it part of the curriculum? As well as other worldviews. I mean, if transpersonal psychology and consciousness studies and New Age are in the business of helping people awaken and elevate their consciousness, then African consciousness must be included in the conversation. More of the divine feminine and women's studies, indigenous peoples' worldviews, more of that must be included. Astrology, psychedelics, the list goes on and on. Its expansiveness studies people. So many questions. Why are these programs so Europeanized and westernized? We must include as much of everything as we can. More about Sufism and Hinduism and Buddhism and the Kabbalah, which my program does include. It's Sophia. So there are more questions that need to be asked and answered. So I'm asking you, and I will speak more about African consciousness as I learn more. So, Love Posse, why has African consciousness not been included in the spiritual consciousness conversation? Thank you for your time, Love Posse. I love you. I love you so much. The divine loves you. You are loved. Before I go, I want to send a shout out to Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum. Also, my friend sent me an interview with Dr. Ifetayo Flannery. I hope I'm pronouncing her first name correctly. Ifetayo Flannery at San Francisco State University. And I apologize if I pronounced your name incorrectly. I will do better. I hope we all will do better. Aho, namaste, namaskara, blessed be, hotep, all of it. I love you, love Posse. I love you.